John Boyega says he would love to see Finn's Star Wars storyline get told in TV or animation. He says it would have been sick to see Finn lead the rebellion as originally planned for the Rise of Skywalker. This is pretty interesting. This is a story that leaked here within the last 48 hours. John Boyega, in an interview, he's referencing Colin Trevorrow's Duel of Fate script that leaked shortly after the Rise of Skywalker. Of course, the Rise of Skywalker featured a story crafted by Chris Terrio and J.J. Abrams, and Finn's revolutionary storyline wasn't necessarily included. I mean, he's riding on the yak on that Star Destroyer, but it wasn't necessarily the story that that leaked from Colin Trevorrow. The exact quote is, "I think Colin Trevorrow was going to tell that story," Boyega said. "The concept art in the Star Wars book has that image of Finn with the blue flag, and you have the AT-ATs lined up with the tribal marks, and the stormtroopers take off their helmets. That would have been sick. That would have been dope, hands down."
Was that Scotty J-Ro that said that, or John Boyega? That sounds like something
No,
that would be sick.
No, I promise you, those were the words of John Boyega in this interview. But I think it's interesting, and I think that we can all agree that Finn, especially based on Force Awakens, is a character that kind of got left out to dry. We were led to believe, even just promotions alone of Force Awakens, you thought Finn was going to be really critical to the story. But once you get to The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker, they work really hard to keep Finn as a secondary background character, if we're being really honest about it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily, here's what happened. The Trevorrow script, did it leak? Yes. And is that like an Elseworlds situation now? Yes, it is. But Arzu, I want to start with you on this. When we're talking about the idea that John Boyega wants to see Finn's story told, that story told, the revolutionary, in TV or in animation, how do you react to that? Because just a couple months ago, John's like, I don't want to freaking talk about Star Wars ever again in my life.
I think if John Boyega wants to come back, you give him however much he is asking for, and you get him back. End of story. Because, okay, so I think the one thing that people who hated The Rise of Skywalker, who love The Rise of Skywalker, one thing everybody can agree on is that Finn did not have much to do. And the common thread among everybody seems to be, but what about this stormtrooper rebellion that came from Trevorrow's script, which is the only part of Trevorrow's script that I actually like. Granted, I haven't read it, but I've read the story points, and it's the only story point that I liked. So I think there is a lot to tell there. I think that is a very compelling story. I also think that if you tell that story in TV, you'll have a longer time to tell it. You can devote more time just to Finn and the other stormtroopers and sort of give them their due. And then also, just for my own personal taste, you can walk back the Rise of Skywalker idea that it's only the special Force-sensitive stormtroopers that can break their conditioning and rebel.
I think that's interesting.
Because that seemed to be the implication. Well, at least that was what I took from it.
Right. And what do you say from the Trevorrow script, the whole Stormtrooper rebellion, that was a real highlight for a lot of fans.
That was real what?
I would say that was a real highlight from the story, right?
Yeah, like that's the one thing that, that Last Jedi fans thought was coming. That's one thing that, people who read Trevorrow's script would have liked to see. That is the thing that unites us in this post-sequel trilogy era. Is whatever you think about the rest of it, that Finn deserved a Stormtrooper rebellion. He deserved, he was the one who saw that something was wrong here and broke out and joined the rebellion. And he can't be the only one, because they make a huge point of saying that these are child soldiers, that they were indoctrinated from an early age, that they were torn from their families. But then by the end of episode 9, they are gleefully killing bunches of them.
Yeah.
Instead of leading them into rebellion. So
and then
that was a story I think we wanted to see, and we didn't.
Wasn't there a thing too where some were like Force sensitive?
That's the thing is Janna and her whole crew are all like, we felt the Force and we put our weapons down. I'm like, okay, so the Force sensitive kids are good enough to break their conditioning and the rest aren't. So we're putting a lot of importance on the Force and not a lot of importance on, I like Force sensitive Finn. I'm not gonna, let's make that thing clear. I like that part. But let's also, not sit here and say that only the Force sensitive stormtroopers are worthy of redemption, of breaking out of the system. I don't like that.
And I think it's interesting what you're saying too, is because we're thinking about stormtroopers as individuals, which when we go and watch the original trilogy, we're never thinking that way.
Right.
We're not really necessarily thinking that way when we see the prequels either, because at that time, then we're just dealing with the clones. I think it's interesting how I think that's one thing that the sequel trilogy did for me, at least. And I think a lot of fans was like show that there's like a lot more potential for somebody under that armor that we can kind of empathize with in a way. Pete, what do you think the shift here is a result of? I mean, I mentioned it just a minute ago. Boyega pretty much sounded like he was writing off Star Wars and done with the franchise. He was bitter with how his character and a lot of the characters that brought diversity to the story were kind of shelved. What do you make of this?
I would love to know exactly what it was that switched his direction, because I mean, it was literally a month and a half ago where he was talking about, nope, I'm done with Star Wars. Finn got shafted. I'm not interested in going back to that. And then suddenly it's a couple things. Number one, I think Matt Harrington said it in the chat. He recognizes it's a gravy train, right? And don't shit on Star Wars if it's going to potentially bring you money in the future, right? So that makes that there's that. But even more interesting is the Disney Plus thing. He even said, there's a quote from him saying, "Don't Disney Plus me, bro," or something like that, right? And now he's talking about going back to that. I think it's a couple things. Number one, I think every actor in Hollywood, I don't care who you are, unless you have Tom Hanks money, you're not turning away any potential job. And I think they recognize that, hey, if Kenobi's going into shooting, Disney's found a way to continue to create content. Let's do it. I'll give a voice to it. Voice acting is a big way for actors to continue to work. So I think it's an interesting turn. I love John Boyega. I support John Boyega. And I totally agree with him that Finn got the short end of the story. But I don't know how I feel about this turn. It just doesn't feel it kind of, in a way, and this might be a hot take, but it kind of negates some of the stuff he said before, and it makes you wonder what side of his mouth he's talking about. And I hate to put it that way, because I really like John Boyega, but geez, I mean, it'd be like if all of a sudden I started saying that, never mind, The Rise of Skywalker was my favorite film of all the Star Wars movies. I would be full of crap. And so I don't know where he's coming from.
Well, I think that's interesting. I don't think that this takes away anything from the racial disparity or the
without a doubt. Nope.
And I don't think that's what you're saying at all.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't think that's what you're saying at all. But I think that's where a lot of his anger and frustration comes. And according to what he says, there's a lot of actors from the sequel trilogy who feel similarly. Mm-hmm. I think that when you devote 6-7 years to a character, I think there's always going to be a piece of you that wants that character to have gotten the best story possible.
Without a doubt.
And so he's probably looking at he's probably still just thinking to himself, I want Finn to have that, because Finn means more than just a stormtrooper to a lot of other Star Wars fans.
And the one thing that I will also make sure to add to this piece of the conversation is we live in clickbait world right now, whether it's selling magazines or selling clicks to your website. The GQ, was it GQ? It was a GQ article.
Mm-hmm. It's GQ.
Yeah, it rode on the fact that he's become and emerged as a great voice for Black Lives Matter and the entire movement, and that's fantastic. But what better way to sell more copy than to be the person who runs with John Boyega says, I want to do Finn again. I mean, that's that. So we don't know the full story. We got the quote. It's a hot quote. It works. It's got us talking. It's got the fans engaged. And look, I would love to see Finn. And I think I said it a couple of weeks ago on either this show or maybe my own show, but Daisy Ridley will never turn her back, and should never turn her back on Rey, because that's where her future may be as well. I mean, not too many people saw Murder on the Orient Express, I'm sorry to say. And, well, you did, Arzu, but so I think maybe he got some advice from somebody that said, look, never turn your back on the Star Wars franchise, because it's always going to be there for you. It's always good to have. And that's great. And I want him to come back as Finn. I want to see more Finn.
I'd like to see General Finn of the New Republic. I think that'd be a lot of fun. Well,
I would say in defense of no, I just want to say in his defense, Pete, to be fair, like a month after Rise of Skywalker, if you're asking him, do you want to do this again? I'm like, no, because I'm exhausted.
Sure.
And he'll say like, no, because whatever. But I think his whole thing is he'll come back as Finn if Finn is the focus of the story, as he should be.
Mm-hmm.
So I think maybe that's where the change of mind was, is he's not going to come back to play second fiddle to anybody else.
But I would argue that I think if you talk to Harrison Ford 15, 20 years ago and said, we're going to do a Han Solo movie, he'd say, not with me. It
wasn't with him.
Because of course that's more recent because of age. But even I think if they did it in 1990, I think he was committed. Now the big difference between Harrison Ford and John Boyega is Harrison Ford didn't do Pacific Rim 2, so so he has more options.
Ouch.
So
ouch.
I'm losing people here, I know, but this is kind of this is the way I kind of see it.
Hey, I think I've said this a few times. Here's my cop out to this kind of conversation. I would love an Elseworlds comic book that was the Colin Trevorrow script, and I would love that as like a big graphic novel. I think that could be a lot of fun. We mentioned it. One of my favorite graphic novels is the original screenplay of Star Wars.
Yes, I
that
think
Lucas
that's so
wrote.
cool. Yeah,
and it's really cool, and I think you can appreciate it as a fan, as a storyteller. That you see how the story evolved. You see, so that's how he became Han. So, Luke is actually, okay. That's really fun. I think if you go and see that original version and see like this is the foundation of Rise of Skywalker, okay, you can kind of see the formation of what we all ultimately got from JJ and Chris Terrio. So that's what I would like to see. I don't think you should leave out the power of a graphic novel, but I understand. Yeah, if you could somehow transform it into animation, something for Disney Plus. I understand that there's an audience of millions of people there clamoring for more content. What do you think about all of this? John Boyega coming out and saying we need more Finn. Of course we want more Finn. Will we get more Finn? We're not quite sure, but let us know what you think down in the comments section. You can also let us know on Twitter all the time to continue the Star Wars conversation at BTBD Star Wars.
Thank you for watching Beyond the Blast Doors. Be sure to subscribe to our channel. Don't forget, give us a thumbs up and leave a comment. Beyond the Blast Doors, a Star Wars conversation.